There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They wear the camouflage of a Tuesday night, or the quiet hum of a refrigerator, or the simple, architectural fact of a door left ajar. You don't recognize them as watershed events at the time. They are just air, just minutes, just wood and brass. It is only later, when you trace the map of your own heart back to its origins, that you see the precise coordinate where everything changed. For me, that coordinate was the hallway of our two-bedroom apartment, and the sliver of yellow light spilling from Liam's room, painting a path on the worn floorboards. It was not an invitation, not yet. It was a question, written in the silent language of luminescence, and I had been learning to read that language for years. I had known Liam since we were 18, a pair of gangly freshmen recruited for the university swim team. We were assigned adjacent lanes in the chlorine-scented cathedral of the aquatic center, and our friendship was forged in the crucible of shared exhaustion and the relentless, rhythmic tyranny of the pace clock. He was all explosive power and raw energy, a sprinter who churned the water into a chaotic froth. I was a distance swimmer, built for endurance, for finding a steady rhythm and holding it for what felt like an eternity. Our styles were a perfect metaphor for our personalities. Liam lived in bright, brilliant bursts, a supernova of laughter, a flash of competitive fire, a sudden, disarming grin that could coax a secret from a stone. I lived in the long, quiet meters, observing, analyzing, conserving my energy for the final push. I watched him from my watery world, the distorted view through my goggles making him seem like a figure from a dream, all broad shoulders and powerful kicks, a creature of pure, unthinking momentum. My feelings for him didn't arrive in a sudden cinematic swell of orchestra music. They seeped in slowly, like water into concrete, fundamentally changing the composition of my interior world until I could no longer remember a time when the foundation of my thoughts wasn't built around him. It began with an appreciation for his uncomplicated goodness, the way he would always wait for me to finish my longer sets, sitting on the edge of the pool deck, feet dangling in the water, even when he was free to leave. He'd just sit there, talking about his day, about a frustrating problem set in his computer science class or a funny story about his roommate, his voice a low rumble that cut through the echoing splashes and the coach's shouts. He never seemed to notice that he was waiting, that he was giving me this small, unremarkable gift of his time. To him, it was just what you did. You waited for your friend. For me, those moments were everything. They were the raw data I collected and cataloged, evidence of a connection I treasured with a fierce, quiet intensity. I became a student of Liam, an archivist of his smallest gestures. The way he ran a hand through his damp, dark hair when he was thinking, the slight furrow that appeared between his brows when he was concentrating on code, his tongue just barely peeking out from the corner of his mouth. The sound of his laugh, a genuine, unburdened thing that started deep in his chest. I was a photographer even then, though only with my eyes, my mind the darkroom where I developed these images of him, fixing them in my memory with a chemical bath of unspoken affection. To love someone in silence is to be a ghost in their life. You are a constant presence, a steady warmth, but you are unseen, your true form and intentions entirely hidden. I was the keeper of a secret garden, lush and vibrant and entirely for myself, and the wall around it was the easy, platonic label of best friend. He dated, of course. He fell in and out of love with the same ferocious, all-in energy he brought to a 50-meter freestyle. There was Jessica from his calculus class, and then Maya from the track team, and finally, Sarah. Sarah was different. She was serious, grounded, an architecture student who seemed to understand his chaotic energy and provide a blueprint for it. They were a good match, a pairing that made a logical, aesthetic sense. They moved in together junior year, and for 3 years, they were an established fact, a landmark on the map of our social circle. I liked Sarah. I genuinely did. She was kind to me, always including me, never making me feel like the third wheel I so often was. She saw me as Liam's quiet, steady anchor, the brother he'd never had. She had no idea that every time he casually slung an arm around her shoulders or kissed her goodbye, a small, silent part of my architecture crumbled. But I had become an expert in reinforcement, in shoring up my own walls so that no one, least of all Liam, could see the damage. I smiled, I made jokes, I played my part. The quiet observer, the loyal friend, the ghost. Our lives after college followed the paths they'd started on. Liam, with his brilliant mind for logic and systems, was immediately snapped up by a software consultancy firm. He worked long, grueling hours, chasing deadlines and navigating complex corporate structures, but he thrived on the pressure. I pursued my photography, a far more precarious and uncertain path. I took whatever work I could find, portraits, events, product shots for local businesses, while slowly building a portfolio of my own work, the quiet, moody landscapes and intimate still lives that truly felt like me. When his lease with Sarah was up, and they were looking for a bigger place, I was looking for a roommate to split the rent on a decent apartment. It was a pragmatic decision. He was working downtown, I was often on the road for shoots, and the place I'd found was a perfect midway point. It just made sense. We could afford a better space together than we could apart. It was a decision based on finances and convenience, a sterile, logical foundation for what would become the most emotionally charged space of my life. Living together was easier than I had imagined, and also infinitely harder. The domestic intimacy of sharing a home was a constant, low-grade torture for my hidden heart. Seeing his worn-out sneakers by the door, the specific way he left his coffee mug on the counter, the sound of him humming off-key in the shower, these were details that wove him into the very fabric of my daily existence. Our apartment became our sanctuary from the pressures of our burgeoning adult lives. We'd collapse on the couch at the end of the day, him complaining about a buggy line of code, me talking about a difficult client or a frustrating shoot. We fell into a rhythm, a comfortable orbit around each other. He was still with Sarah, of course. She was over often, her presence a constant, painful reminder of the boundaries of my place in his life. I was the roommate, the best friend, the furniture, and I was so terrified of losing what I had that I never, ever dared to ask for more. I learned to live in the ache. It became a familiar companion, a dull throb beneath the surface of our easy camaraderie. It was the price of admission to his life, and I paid it without complaint. The shift began on a Tuesday. I remember the specific, mundane details of the day. The sky was the color of dishwater, a flat, uninspiring gray. I had spent the afternoon in my makeshift darkroom, a converted closet, trying to coax the soul out of a landscape shot I'd taken in the mountains. The sharp, vinegary smell of the fixer clung to my clothes. I was emerging, blinking, into the dim light of the living room when I heard his key in the lock. It was early for him, not even 6 o'clock. He usually worked until 7 or 8, fueled by takeout and the relentless pursuit of an elegant solution to some complex programming problem. He walked in, and the first thing I noticed was that he was empty-handed. No briefcase, no gym bag. The second thing I noticed was the look on his face. It was a look I had never seen before, a hollowed-out, shell-shocked vacancy that seemed to extinguish the usual light in his eyes. He looked like a building after a fire, the structure still standing but all the life within it gone. He closed the door behind him with a soft, final click. He didn't say a word. He just walked to the center of the living room and stood there, staring at the worn patch on our rug as if it held the answers to the universe. I could feel the silence in the room change its density, becoming heavy, suffocating. My own breath caught in my chest, a knot of apprehension tightening in my stomach. I knew, with the kind of gut-level certainty that bypasses all logic, that something was fundamentally broken. I waited, giving him the space to speak first, my role as the observer deeply ingrained. "She's gone," he finally whispered. The words were so quiet they were almost absorbed by the air, but they landed in my mind with the force of a physical blow. "Gone? Sarah?" I didn't understand. I had just seen her 2 days ago. They were planning a weekend trip. They were looking at dogs online. "What do you mean, gone?" I asked, my voice equally soft, afraid a normal volume might shatter him completely. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were glistening. She ended it, packed her stuff while I was at work, left a note. He made a small, helpless gesture with his hand. A goddamn note. 3 years, and I get a note on the kitchen counter, my heart fractured for him. Not for the loss of Sarah, not really, but for the profound, ragged pain etched onto his face. The supernova was gone, replaced by a black hole. He looked so lost, so utterly adrift in the space that had, just that morning, been his life. I crossed the room and did the only thing I could think of. I put my arms around him. It wasn't the first time we had hugged, not by a long shot. We were swimmers, athletes. Casual physical contact was part of our shared language. But this was different. He didn't just accept the hug, he collapsed into it. His body, usually so taut with energy, went limp against mine, his head falling onto my shoulder. I could feel the tremors running through him, the shuddering, silent sobs he was trying and failing to contain. I just held him, my hand resting on the back of his neck, my own grief a complicated, selfish thing, sorrow for his pain, and a terrible, shameful flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope. That night was the beginning of the ritual. He couldn't be alone. The apartment we shared was suddenly haunted by the ghost of his future with Sarah, a future that had evaporated in the space of an afternoon. He tried to go to his room, but came back out minutes later, his face pale. "I can't," he said, his voice raw. "Everything in there. It's all us," so he stayed on the couch. I brought him a blanket and a pillow, and I sat in the armchair opposite him until his breathing evened out into the shallow, fitful sleep of the heartbroken. I watched him for hours, the faint glow from the streetlights tracing the sharp lines of his jaw, the way his brows were still furrowed even in sleep. A part of me, the part that loved him, wanted to smooth that worry away with my thumb. The part that was his friend just ached for his loss. The couch became his bed for the next week. He'd come home from work, utterly drained, the effort of pretending to be fine all day leaving him with nothing left. We would order food, watch some mindless television show, and he would inevitably fall asleep, his head eventually finding its way to my lap or my shoulder. At first, I was rigid with a kind of terrified reverence. His proximity was a fire I was trying not to get burned by. I would sit ramrod straight, my muscles screaming in protest, until my own exhaustion forced me to relax. I focused on the minutiae, the texture of his hair against my cheek, the warmth of his breath on my neck, the subtle weight of his trust. He was seeking comfort, nothing more. He was a ship battered by a storm, and I was simply the nearest port. To assign any other meaning to it would be a dangerous, self-destructive fantasy. I repeated this to myself like a mantra, a litany against hope. But the lines began to blur. One night, about 2 weeks after the breakup, we were watching an old movie. He wasn't sleeping. He was just leaning against me, his arm pressed alongside mine, his head on my shoulder. He was quiet for a long time, and I thought maybe he had finally drifted off. Then, he spoke, his voice a low murmur against my collarbone. "Do you ever feel completely untethered?" he asked. I looked down at him. His eyes were open, staring at the flickering screen but not seeing it. "Like you're just floating in space, and you don't know which way is up?" "All the time," I answered honestly. It was the very definition of my life as a freelance artist, of my life as a man in love with his straight best friend. He shifted, turning into me more, tucking himself closer. His hand came to rest on my stomach, a casual, unconscious gesture of seeking stability. My entire body went on high alert. Every nerve ending fired at once. It was the most natural and the most terrifying touch I had ever experienced. It was an anchor, and it was a brand. "Thanks for being my anchor, Leo," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. And then he was out, his breathing deepening into a slow, steady rhythm. I sat there for what felt like hours, pinned by the weight of his hand, by the weight of his words, by the weight of a hope I was trying so desperately to kill. The ritual evolved again a week later. It was late, after midnight. A thunderstorm was raging outside, the kind of violent, percussive storm that rattles the window panes and makes the lights flicker. Liam was jumpy, restless. He paced the living room, a caged animal. He still hadn't been able to sleep in his own bed. He claimed it was the memories, but I suspected it was the loneliness, the sudden, stark emptiness of a space once shared. He finally stopped in front of me, looking exhausted and defeated. "I can't sleep on that couch one more night," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "My back is killing me. And I just, I can't be alone in my room." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. It was a look that bypassed all my defenses. Would it be weird if I just crashed in your room? On the floor? I'll take a sleeping bag. I don't want to be alone." My room was my sanctuary. It was the one place that was entirely mine, where I could retreat from the constant, low-level hum of my feelings for him. Letting him in felt like a violation of some sacred treaty I had made with myself. But looking at his frayed, desperate expression, I couldn't say no. It would have been cruel. "Don't be an idiot," I said, trying to sound casual, breezy. "You're not sleeping on the floor. The bed's big enough." It was a lie. My bed was a standard double, perfectly adequate for one person, but a decidedly intimate space for two grown men. But the words were out, and I couldn't take them back. He gave me a small, grateful smile that twisted my heart into a knot. "Are you sure?" he asked. I just nodded, unable to speak. That first night was an exercise in agonizing self-control. I lay on the absolute edge of my side of the mattress, my body rigid, a sliver of cold air separating us. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could hear every breath he took. He was just as tense, lying flat on his back, staring at the ceiling. The silence in the room was deafening, filled with all the things we weren't saying. After an eternity, he shifted, turning onto his side, facing away from me. The small movement felt like a seismic event. I stayed awake long after his breathing had settled, my mind a frantic race of what-ifs and this-is-nothings. I was a cartographer, meticulously mapping the new, dangerous territory we had entered, every inch of it fraught with peril for my carefully guarded heart. The floor was never mentioned again. From that night on, my bed became our bed. The initial stiffness between us slowly dissolved, eroded by proximity and exhaustion. The space between us shrank. One night, I woke up to find his arm thrown over my waist, his face buried in my back. Another night, we fell asleep facing each other, our legs tangled together under the blankets. It became a new kind of normal, a fragile ecosystem of unspoken rules and ambiguous comfort. He would come into my room after his shower, smelling of soap and steam, and slide into bed without a word. He needed the physical presence of another person to keep the ghosts at bay. And I needed him. I told myself I was just being a good friend. It was a lie I clung to like a life raft, even as I felt myself being pulled under by the powerful, undeniable current of what was happening between us. My internal world became a courtroom. The prosecutor, a cold, rational voice, presented the evidence. "He's heartbroken. He's lonely. He's straight. He's using you for comfort, for warmth, a human heating pad. This means nothing. To him, you are a safe, non-threatening space, a brother." The defense, a smaller, more hopeful voice, offered its rebuttal. "But the way he looks at you sometimes, when he thinks you're not watching. The way his hand finds yours in his sleep. The way he told you last week that your room was the only place he felt he could breathe. No one does this with just a friend. People build walls for a reason. He's not just sleeping in my bed. He's taking shelter inside my life." The architecture of our friendship was being renovated, room by room, and I didn't know if the final structure would be a shared home or a ruin. The door was the tell. In the beginning, he would close my bedroom door completely when he came in. It was a clear demarcation. This is your space, and I am a temporary guest. Then, one night, he left it slightly ajar. Just a crack. A few nights later, it was opened by a foot. Soon, he stopped touching it at all. He would walk in and get into bed, leaving the door wide open to the darkened hallway. To me, this felt profoundly significant. A closed door is a boundary, a statement of privacy. An open door is an admission of belonging. It was a subtle shift in the physics of our shared space, a change in atmospheric pressure that I felt in my bones. He was no longer just a visitor in my room. He was becoming a resident. It was a silent declaration that the line between his space and my space no longer existed. We were a single territory. We lived in this liminal state for 3 months. 3 months of shared beds and unspoken tension, of quiet intimacy that hung in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam. Visible, tangible, but impossible to grasp. I felt like I was living inside one of my own photographs, a long exposure shot where everything was soft, blurred, and deeply ambiguous. I was afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid that any sudden action would collapse the delicate, beautiful, agonizing thing we were building. I existed in a state of hyper-awareness. I was conscious of the exact distance between our bodies at all times, the brush of his skin against mine, the cadence of his breathing as he slept. My love for him, once a secret garden, had overgrown its walls and was now threatening to consume the entire landscape. Then came the night of the crossing. It was a Thursday in late autumn. A cold, biting wind rattled the windows, and the rain fell in relentless, sleety sheets. Liam had had a brutal week at work, a project launch that had gone sideways. He came home looking shattered, the familiar hollowed-out look back in his eyes. He skipped dinner, showered, and was in my bed before I had even finished washing the dishes. When I came into the room, he was lying on his side, facing me, his eyes open and tracing patterns on the ceiling. I slid in beside him, the familiar routine playing out. But tonight, the air was different. The usual comfortable silence was gone, replaced by something taut and electric. We lay there for a long time, the only sounds the drumming of the rain and the frantic beating of my own heart. I could feel his gaze on me in the darkness, and I kept my own eyes fixed on the sliver of light under the door. If I looked at him, I knew I would break. If I met his eyes, the carefully constructed dam of my self-control would burst. Leo. His voice was a ghost of a sound, a whisper that barely disturbed the air. Yeah. I whispered back, my throat tight. He was quiet for another long moment. I could feel him gathering his courage, and a primal fear shot through me. Whatever was coming, it was going to change everything. The foundation was about to be tested. Can I ask you something? Always, I said, the word coming out steadier than I felt. He took a slow, deep breath, the sound of it filling the small space between us. He shifted, his body moving infinitesimally closer. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my cheek now. Would it be okay? He started, his voice cracking on the last word. He paused, and then finished in a rush of air. Would it be okay if I kissed you? The world stopped. The rain, the wind, the city outside. It all faded away to a dull, distant roar. The only thing that existed was his question, hanging in the dark between us. It was a key. Turning the lock on a door I had long ago accepted would remain sealed forever. It was a request for permission to demolish the very walls I had spent years building to protect myself. My mind, the ever-present analyst, was screaming. This is a mistake. He's confused. He's grieving. He'll regret this. You will regret this. But my heart, that foolish, stubborn organ, had already answered. I turned my head on the pillow, finally meeting his gaze. In the faint moonlight filtering through the window, I could see the raw vulnerability in his eyes. He wasn't the confident, sunbright boy from the pool. He was just Liam, lost and searching, and for some reason, he was searching for me. I didn't say yes. I couldn't form the word. Instead, I just leaned forward, closing the last inch of space between us. His lips were softer than I could have ever imagined. The kiss wasn't passionate or demanding. It was tentative, questioning. It was a confession. It was the taste of rain and salt and 3 months of unspoken things. It was a quiet, desperate collision in the dark. I felt a tremor run through him as my hand came up to cup his jaw, my thumb stroking his skin. It was real. This was happening. He kissed me back, a slow, deepening pressure, and in that moment, the secret garden I had tended for so long burst into impossible, brilliant bloom. The ghost in his life suddenly had flesh and bone. The quiet observer was finally, terrifyingly, part of the scene. The kiss ended as gently as it began. He pulled back slightly, our foreheads resting together. His breathing was shaky. Okay, he whispered, as if in answer to his own question. Okay, I breathed back. And we fell asleep like that, tangled together, the storm outside having finally broken, leaving behind a profound and unnerving quiet. The aftermath began with silence. I woke the next morning to an empty space beside me. The indentation of his head was still on the pillow. The sheets still held his residual warmth, but Liam was gone. It wasn't unusual for him to be up first for work, but there was a stillness in the apartment that felt wrong. It was the silence of avoidance. I got up and walked into the living room. His briefcase was gone. A coffee mug was in the sink, rinsed. He had left for the office without a word, without a glance, without acknowledging that the entire tectonic plate of our relationship had shifted beneath us during the night. A cold, sickening dread began to pool in my stomach. I had been so stupid. The prosecutor in my mental courtroom was back, gavel banging. I told you so. I told you this was a mistake. He didn't come home that night. A text message appeared on my phone around 9 o'clock. Hey, project blew up. Gonna be an all-nighter. Prob crash on Dave's couch. He's closer to the office. See you tomorrow. The words were casual, practical, but I could read the subtext. I could feel the panic radiating from the screen. He was running. He had crossed a line he didn't understand, and his only instinct was to flee the scene of the crime. And I, apparently, was the scene of the crime. The pain was a sharp, physical thing, a shard of glass in my chest. The beautiful, fragile thing we had built had been a house of cards, and a single gust of honesty had blown it all away. The next day was worse. He came home late, and when I tried to talk to him, he was evasive, his eyes refusing to meet mine. He filled the space between us with meaningless chatter about work, about the weather, about a new restaurant he'd heard of. He was a stranger in our own home, an actor playing the part of my roommate. That night, he mumbled something about being exhausted and went into his own room. He closed the door. The soft click of the latch echoed in the hallway like a gunshot. The open door, my symbol of our shared territory, was now a sealed border. I was on one side, and he was on the other, and the country between us had been declared a no-man's land. I went into my room, my large, empty bed feeling like a vast, cold wasteland. The ghost was back, only this time, I was haunting myself. This went on for a week. A week of stilted conversations, of careful choreography to avoid being in the same room alone, of him retreating behind his closed door every night. The silence in the apartment was no longer comfortable. It was a weapon. It was thick with regret and confusion. His regret, my confusion. Or maybe it was the other way around. I was oscillating between anger and a deep, bottomless sadness. I felt like I had been used, a temporary comfort object to be discarded once he had passed the worst of his grief. But beneath the anger was the hurt. He had initiated it. He had asked. He had opened that door, and when I had walked through it, he had slammed it shut behind me. I knew if I didn't do something, this would be the end. Not just of whatever had happened in the dark, but of us. Our friendship, the foundation of my entire adult life, was crumbling into dust. I couldn't let that happen without a fight, or at least, without an explanation. I found my resolve. I would not let him erase that kiss. I would not let him erase me. I waited for him to come home on Friday night. I sat on the couch, the lights dim, and waited. When he walked in, he visibly flinched at seeing me there, like a man caught in a spotlight. He started to make some excuse, something about needing to make a call, but I cut him off. "Liam, stop," I said. My voice was quiet, but it had a core of steel I didn't know I possessed. "We need to talk," he froze, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He knew he couldn't run anymore. He dropped his bag by the door and sank into the armchair opposite me, the same one I had sat in watching him sleep all those weeks ago. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at his hands, twisting them in his lap. "What happened?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "What changed?" He shook his head, a gesture of pure frustration. "Nothing changed, Leo. That's the problem. I'm still me, and who is that?" I pressed, leaning forward. "Because the you I know doesn't run. The you I know doesn't hide. The you I know doesn't ask for something and then pretend it never happened." He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were full of a desperate, panicked confusion. "I don't know what that was," he said, his voice cracking. I don't know. Messed up. Lonely. You were there. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. Every word was a hammer blow. It didn't mean anything. He was trying to invalidate the most real moment of my life, trying to reduce it to a symptom of his grief. The anger flared, hot and sharp. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Don't you dare do that. Don't you take that moment, which was honest and real, and turn it into something cheap. It might have been a mistake to you, but it wasn't meaningless. And you have no right to tell me what it meant." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his face crumpling. "God, Leo, I'm so sorry. I'm so confused. I've been with Sarah for 3 years. I've only ever been with women. I thought I knew who I was. And then this. With you. It felt right. And that scares the hell out of me. Because what does that make me? What does that mean?" And there it was. The truth. It wasn't about me, not really. It was about him. His identity, his self-perception, his entire life's narrative had been thrown into chaos. The kiss hadn't just been a kiss. It had been an earthquake that had shattered his own foundations. My anger receded, replaced by a wave of weary empathy. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man, terrified and lost. "What do you want to do, Liam?" I asked, my voice soft again. He looked at me, his expression pleading. "I want my best friend back," he said. "I want to go back to how it was. Can we please just forget it happened? Pretend it was just a weird dream. Pretend it meant nothing." It was a choice. I could fight for the truth of that moment, and in doing so, I would likely lose him forever. He would retreat so far into his fear and confusion that I would never find him again. Or I could swallow the shard of glass. I could take the pain and bury it, and in doing so, I could salvage the friendship that was the bedrock of my world. It felt like choosing between two different kinds of death. I took a deep breath, the air burning in my lungs. I made the only choice I could, the choice to keep him. "Okay," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Okay, Liam. We forget, and so we pretended. We entered into a new, unspoken contract. The kiss was relegated to a locked room in the house of our friendship, a room we never, ever opened. We fell back into a semblance of our old routine, but it was a careful, brittle performance. The easy, unconscious physical contact was gone. We maintained a careful distance on the couch. We no longer shared a bed. The open door was a thing of the past. There was a new wall between us, a wall built of his fear and my swallowed pain. It was a ghost wall, invisible to the naked eye, but we both felt its chilling presence every single day. I spent the next 2 years of my life pretending that the most significant moment I had ever experienced had never happened at all. I learned to live with the haunting. Time, they say, heals all wounds. I think that's a lie. Time doesn't heal. It teaches you to live with the scar. For 2 years, Liam and I lived with the scar of that night. Our friendship survived, but it was a different entity. It was quieter, more cautious. We were like two people who had survived a shipwreck, clinging to the same piece of driftwood, careful not to make any sudden moves that might plunge us both back into the icy water. He started dating again, cautiously at first, and then more seriously. A woman named Chloe from his work. She was nice enough, but I saw the way he held himself back with her, a part of him always reserved, always walled off. He was performing the role of the person he thought he was supposed to be, and the performance was exhausting him. I watched him, the quiet observer once more, and saw the light in his eyes slowly dimming, buried under the weight of his own denial. I poured myself into my work. My photography became my solace, the darkroom my confessional. I channeled all the unspoken yearning, all the muted pain, into my art. My work got better. It deepened. It became imbued with a sense of melancholy and longing that resonated with people. I had my first solo gallery show. Liam came, of course. He walked through the gallery, studying the moody landscapes and the stark, intimate portraits. He stood for a long time in front of one particular piece, a photograph I had taken of my empty bed, the morning light streaming in, illuminating the indentation on the pillow where his head used to be. I had titled it, simply, Vacancy. He looked from the photograph to me, his eyes full of a sorrow so profound it stole my breath. He knew what the picture was about. But under the terms of our treaty, he could say nothing. He just clapped me on the shoulder and said, "It's beautiful, Leo. You're amazing," and the ghost wall between us seemed to grow a little thicker. The breaking point, when it came, was not a dramatic explosion, but a slow, quiet implosion. It was nearly 2 years to the day after the kiss. Chloe had broken up with him. The reason, she had told him, was that she always felt like he was holding a part of himself back, that he was never fully present, never fully hers. He told me this on a Saturday afternoon, sitting on our couch, the same couch where our ritual had begun. He wasn't devastated like he had been with Sarah. He was just empty, resigned. "She was right," he said, staring at the familiar worn patch on the rug. "I wasn't all there. I haven't been all there for a long time." He looked over at me, his gaze direct and weary. The panic was gone, replaced by a deep, settled sadness. "I'm so tired of pretending, Leo." My heart began to beat a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. "Pretending what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "That I'm okay," he said. "That I know who I am. That what happened between us, that it didn't mean anything." He finally said the words he had used as a shield for 2 years. This time, they weren't a denial. They were a confession of a lie. He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the gray cityscape. "I've spent 2 years trying to run from that night," he continued, his back to me. "I tried to bury it. I tried to convince myself it was a fluke, a moment of grief-fueled madness. I tried to be the person I've always been. But it's like you rewired me. That kiss, it wasn't an ending or a mistake. It was a beginning. It was the first honest thing I think I'd ever done, and it terrified me so much I immediately tried to destroy it." He turned around, and there were tears tracking down his face. The supernova, the one I thought had been extinguished forever, was there, but it was different. It was softer, more vulnerable. It was the light of a star being reborn. "I was a coward," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I hurt you. I let my fear hurt the one person who has ever been a true home to me. And I have lived with that every single day. Every time I looked at you, I saw what I was too afraid to be. Every time I closed my door, I felt like I was suffocating." He crossed the room and stood in front of me. He didn't touch me. He just stood there, letting me see all of him, all the fear and regret and hope. "I love you, Leo," he said, the words quiet but absolute. "I think I have for a long time, in a way I didn't have the language for. I was just too scared to see it, too scared to be it. I'm not scared anymore. I'm just tired of being without you." I had imagined this moment in 1,000 different ways over the years. In my dreams, it was cinematic, triumphant. But in reality, it was just quiet. It was just two people in a worn-out living room, with 2 years of pain and silence between them. I didn't feel a rush of joy. I felt a slow, profound sense of release. The shard of glass I had been carrying in my chest for so long finally dissolved. The ghost that had haunted our apartment, the ghost of what we could have been, simply faded away. I stood up, and for the first time in 2 years, I closed the distance between us without hesitation. I put my hand on his cheek, his skin damp with tears. He leaned into my touch, his eyes closing, a shudder of relief passing through him. "You were worth the wait," I whispered, and I kissed him. It wasn't a kiss of desperate confession like the first one. It was a kiss of recognition. A kiss that said, "There you are. I see you." It was a kiss that tasted of forgiveness and second chances. It was a kiss that felt like coming home. We didn't need to talk anymore after that. The years of silence had been broken, and in its place, a new kind of quiet settled over us. A peaceful, intentional quiet. That night, he followed me into my bedroom. He didn't ask. He just came in. He closed the door behind him, not to shut me out or to hide, but to shut the rest of the world out, so that the only thing that existed was us, in this room, in this new and fragile truth. We got into bed, and when he wrapped his arms around me, pulling me against his chest, there was no tension, no fear. It was just right. It was the end of the pretending. It was the beginning of everything else. In the end, we learned that a home is not a place with 4 walls and a roof. It is not defined by an address or a set of keys. A true home is a space of profound safety, a harbor built not of wood and nails, but of trust and acceptance. It's the quiet understanding in another person's eyes, the steady rhythm of their breathing in the dark, the unspoken knowledge that you can lay down your weapons, take off your armor, and simply be. For years, I had been his shelter from the storm, a temporary port in his grief. But that night, lying in the peaceful dark, I realized we had finally stopped being a refuge for each other. We had started building a home, together, in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned, at long last, to create.